Hello, everyone, and welcome to New York. This is the third day of my trip to New York, and honestly, I was pretty tired, and I knew I only really had about 3 hours until I had to start heading back to Toronto. So, I was going to go to the park and just enjoy it, but it was a little bit cooler, and I was tired and didn't really feel like doing all the walking because I had done a lot of walking over the last couple of days. So I decided to go and just jump back on the tour bus and go for a spin. As this making videos and putting them on YouTube for this personal account is a little bit new to me, I had the bright idea of going to the park and having a beautiful background and just starting to do a little bit of the storytelling that I'm doing now, but I was going to be on camera and have just a beautiful background and a set, so to speak, behind me. But I also noticed all the people every day in Times Square that were just doing videos and YouTube videos and TikToks and everything else. And I saw some of them in Central Park, I saw them in Times Square and other places, and I could tell how much time and effort they were putting into it, and I was super impressed because they're obviously professionals, and I'm not. But I'm on vacation, and I want to enjoy the city, I want to see the sights and sounds, and honestly, just sitting in Times Square, people watching is really entertaining, and even just watching the people make their videos, super entertaining. But the amount of takes and the amount of time and the effort that they put into it, I was like, I just want to remember and see the sights and sounds, and I can just do a sit down and talk about it afterwards. So originally I had planned on using my better camera for most of the video, which I'm using for this, but I had made a mistake on the memory card and forgot to bring it and had to get one, and then I got one, but then I didn't use it as much as I wanted to. So I kind of felt it was a shame to have taken all the time and effort, bring it there and not use it, get a new SD card, not use it. So on my last trip, I just decided I'm going to film the bus ride, and then I can talk over top of it, which is kind of similar to a lot of the videos you see where they'll put like just random stuff in behind that has nothing to do with stories, and they'll just tell stories about, people's different relationships. They'll tell stories about, different, criminals, or tell stories about just silly things people have done. And I was kind of thinking, hey, the background in New York is a beautiful thing to see, and it's forever changing. So while I kind of ramble on and tell my stories, hey, have a peek at New York on this day, which happened to be November 8th, 2024. So it was a nice day. A little bit chilly, but it was a nice day. I actually had planned on shooting this camera scene on the bus the night before. I had finished going for a bit of a tour, and I had gone down to Chinatown and walked all over some different spots, and then I took this exact same bus back because once you have the pass you can jump on and off it, and I happened to get a 2-day pass. The guy gave me a deal. If you ask around, there's always someone that's going to give you a deal, and I got the extra day, which I didn't necessarily need, but I wanted the night package so I could basically do exactly what I did here but at nighttime. But by the time I got back and had supper, it was definitely getting chilly, and I was just tired from a long day. So my plan of filming this exact same scene at nighttime fell by the wayside because it was just way too cold, and I had already kind of decided that I was going to do this, so I'm just repurposing it. Not to mention, I had to do that tour and be back in Times Square by 9 o'clock because I had tickets to a comedy show, which was spectacular. And all of this just kind of reminds me of previous trips I've taken to New York, including a comedy show, which was my favorite comedy show I have ever seen. So I definitely wanted to go to another comedy show, which The entire trip kind of gets you thinking about past experiences, past times, and I thought I would share that with you. The very first time I came to New York was in 2008. Yankee Stadium was closing. I don't like the Yankees, but I'm a big baseball fan. I love baseball. I never really traveled too much to games, but as a baseball lover and someone that loves the history of baseball and at different times had looked up and studied some different things on baseball, you can't not value Yankee Stadium. And they were going to tear it down and build a new one. And I was like, this is the year I'm going to go to New York and see Yankee Stadium. As a true fan of baseball, I have to see Yankee Stadium. So I called a friend, made arrangements, and we embarked on our trip to New York to see the Blue Jays versus the Yankees. So the night before the game I was going to go to with my friend, we decided to leave after work, and we knew we were only going to drive part way because it's an 8.5 hour drive, and we weren't going to make it the entire night. So we decided to drive from Toronto to Syracuse, stay in Syracuse. We found a very cheap, very cheap motel. It had a stove that randomly just came on. It had leaking water all over. It was definitely not in the best part of Syracuse, but as a couple of young men in their 20s, we just cared about being cheap, and it was perfect for us. And Syracuse became one of the most memorable moments of our entire lives because when we stopped there, it was probably midnight, and we went to one of the bars to hang out for a couple hours. And one of the patrons or one of the wait staff, I can't remember, came up to us, and it was a really seedy bar. And the person was like, those guys at the end of the bar, yeah, they're casing you and they're planning on jumping you guys as soon as you leave. So we're definitely a little bit concerned due to the fact that the person seemed very adamant that they were going to jump us. We didn't make it ruin our night, but we stayed for another half hour or so. And we did happen to notice when a police officer came in by the door, and we're like, hey, this is our time. So we used that opportunity when a police officer came in the door to make our exit and went back to our also seedy hotel, which was not in good shape. But it made for a very memorable night, being told that we were basically going to be robbed the moment we walked out of the building. So that was our adventure in Syracuse, New York. But we continued on the next morning and made it to New York City. And one of the biggest things is we were just driving and driving, and it just seemed like you're on this road where you don't really see a lot of buildings because it was pretty hidden, all the buildings, even off the exits. You didn't feel like you were just approaching a massive city. And then all of a sudden we just kind of drove out, and it was just boom, there you are. And it'll be the New Jersey side, I'm pretty sure, that we came out on, and we could see, and then we carried our way in, and you could see the high rises of New York and Manhattan all in the distance. But it was just absolutely beautiful and just amazing and overwhelming, coming from absolutely nothing that we've been driving in for hours to boom, you're in the heart of the city. So it was so exciting to finally get to a Blue Jays New York Yankees game in New York. We had an absolutely fantastic time. We enjoyed it so much. And again, we're young guys in their 20s. So we decided to ask some young men that we met in New York where the best place to go hang out in New York was. And they gave us some directions. Keep in mind, this is before everyone had GPS on their cell phones and could just Google everything. And data was insane. You couldn't get that down in the States on your cell phone at the time. So, we did the old-fashioned thing of talking to people. And anyways, these guys gave us directions to this bar, and we embarked after the Blue Jays game, and we went to this bar. Keep in mind, it's pretty dark at night at this point, and we're driving down the road, and all of a sudden, we kind of notice everything changed around us. And my buddy says to me, do you think we're in Harlem? And I'm like, I don't know. I see Harlem Hospital Center, and we're on Malcolm X Boulevard. We might just be in Harlem. Keep in mind, we're both young, open minded men that have no issue with that. But all we knew about Harlem is what we saw from the movies, TV shows, and obviously music videos. It did not deter us, so we continued on. So we made it to the club in which we were headed to. And after a little while, and my buddy had had some drinks because he's a drinker and I'm not, we happened to go to the men's room and we noticed the urinals were extremely high up in the air. And keep in mind, I'm 6 foot tall. I actually couldn't even reach them. They were so tall. And we were kind of joking around and still joke to this day that that might have been the way in Harlem to keep white guys out if they can't reach the urinal, which we thought was kind of funny. And I know I'm being a little bit leading into stereotypes, but again, this is the early 2000s and it was pretty funny. But even with those stereotypes at the time, certain things just don't age well. The club was actually owned by P. Diddy, and obviously right now there's so much controversy that's going on about P. Diddy, but it just kind of adds to the story in which we had experienced at the time. And it is kind of funny because, again, in 2008, when we were traveling through New York, we noticed very much that it felt segregated. And you would be in an area that was so white, and then you would literally hit Chinatown. It was obviously very Asian, and obviously same with the black African American communities. It would hit you like a wall, which we weren't used to because Toronto is very multicultural. Now there is some areas where there's definite differences, but we weren't quite used to it just being like, boom, there's a complete divide. I will say, on my more recent trips, I don't feel like the divide is there to the extent it used to be. Anyways, back to the story. We kind of looked in retrospect that when we were at Yankee Stadium, it was as white could be. There was really no culture there at the time. It was white. And we literally made friends with the security guards, which were all African American black men. And it's kind of not surprising that they all sent us to Harlem, to the best club at the time. And honestly, we had a great time. We actually went back the next night because it was a fantastic time. And they were right. So the next day, before the final game that we were going to go see, we basically toured New York. We went and saw the sights. And it is kind of funny because when you're in a different area that you don't know, we were misreading street signs the entire 2 or 3 days we were there. We saw all these signs for parking and you had to pay, so we just kept paying. And on the very final day at the Empire State Building, we got a ticket, and the guy was giving us the ticket right as we were leaving. And I went up to him. I'm like, hey, it says I still have 4 minutes. What's up? And he's like, yeah, if it's in black, that means commercial, and you're not allowed to park there. And I'm like, but it doesn't say anything on that sign about being commercial. And he's like, you're supposed to know that. And I'm like, oh, okay. And he's like, do you want me to hand it to you or mail it to you? And I knew he was giving me an opportunity to get out of it. I just didn't know what the right answer was. So I asked him to hand it to me. And anyways, that ticket went away. I was a little disappointed. During this bus tour, they have some audio that you can listen to. And it mentioned the hours of the Empire State Building. And when me and Jason had gone to the Empire State Building in 2008, it was under renovation. So when you walked in, it was just full of wood, and you really couldn't see a lot of the entrance, and you basically shuttled to the elevator to go up to the top, and then once you were at the top, it was beautiful. But we really didn't get to see any of the building. We just basically elevator and then the top, which I know you go to see the top, but I was thinking going back. But on this bus tour, it had the hours, and it's saying about it was open late, and it gave certain hours. I can't remember. It was like 12 or 1 o'clock a.m. obviously. And I decided I was going to go see it because I thought it would be neat to go up to the top again during the evening when it was all dark and see all of New York lit up. So when I was going to Winter Village in the evening to see that lit up, I was going to stop off and go up. And to my surprise, it was closed at 10 p.m., which was not what the bus tour had said. So I was a little disappointed because I thought about going back to see it, hopefully in its prime, not being renovated. So the final game that we went to for the Blue Jays Yankees was actually pretty exciting. It was a little on the heartbreaking side due to the fact that the Jays lost, but it was also super exciting due to the fact that Jason Giambi at the time, hit a home run to win the game for the Yankees, and that home run landed in the person's lap, basically right in front of me. I didn't have a chance at it. It was clearly 100% to him, but at the time, Blue Jays fans didn't travel to games like they do now. I stood out in Yankee Stadium because the Blue Jays had a Flashback Fridays jersey. Flashback Fridays, everything really. And I was wearing this powder blue jersey, and the game winning hit happened right in front of me, and it was all over ESPN, all the sports channels in Canada, Sportsnet and TSN, and it was pretty cool seeing yourself on TV for an entire week. And that was the first experience I really ever had of being on TV at a road game, and that was pretty cool to me. The only other note that I have of being at that game, it was pretty neat when you came up to the stadium because you could see both the new and the old stadium because the new stadium was being built, and from the outside it looked like it was pretty close at that time, so you got to see basically both stadiums. That, and one of the things my grandmother taught me when it comes to food, when you're traveling, if there's no crowd, it means it's not good. If there's a crowd, it means it's good. We went to this deli that was just in the Bronx down the road from Yankee Stadium, and I literally had the best Reuben sandwich I've ever had in my entire life. And I definitely will say the two best deli sandwiches I've ever had in my life were both in New York. The other one was on another trip years later, but absolutely it was worth the line that me and Jason stayed in to get that Reuben. It was incredible. Overall, it was just an excellent trip, and it's the trip that basically set me off going to see a lot of baseball parks in the future, as well as continuing just doing trips like this. There were so many positive memories. I will say, though, there was one somber memory. We did go see the site of the World Trade Center. We didn't go there necessarily to see that. We went to Staten Island and we were doing some other driving around. I think we went to see the Ghostbusters building, and we just kept driving and driving and driving, and we ended up there. And we went and had a look, and it was all boarded off on the ground and stuff like that. And there was a little plaque that you could see. It was dinner time, and there was a McDonald's. We didn't realize this when we went to the McDonald's, but the McDonald's was up a floor, and you could actually see right into the hole of the World Trade Center. Now, they were still cleaning it out, and it was just insane to think about the tragedy and everything that had happened there on that spot, and to be able to see right down in the hole where the building used to be. I know you can see the monument and everything now, but there's just something that's more unsettling seeing that hole, as they were still working on digging out the debris and getting rid of the old foundation of the old building. It was pretty somber. And that basically concludes the original trip that I made to New York City. We drove around and saw so many sights, but we didn't necessarily get out and do the buildings besides the Empire State Building or, you know, Lady Liberty. We just kind of went and looked at everything versus touring everything, and it was great. We had a wonderful time, which leads me into my second trip. I kind of figured, seeing as I saw the historical ending to Yankee Stadium, that I wanted to go see the new Yankee Stadium, compare it while everything was fresh in my mind. So the very next year, I talked another friend into going to New York with me. So this time, Krissa came with me. And again, we drove down. This time, we didn't stop in Syracuse and any shady places. Krista definitely wouldn't let me stay in any shady places. But we still did the same thing that I did the year before, which is basically park in New Jersey and then just travel over to New York the next day. What we would do is stay at a motel, which was actually beautiful. It was just on the side of the river, so you looked out and you saw New York in its glory, and at nighttime it was spectacular. And then we would just cross the bridge in the morning, go over to the Bronx, park at Yankee Stadium, which was only $20 a day, so I got a cheaper place to stay and only paid $20 for the entire day to park. And Krissa is much, much better at using public transportation than I am, and she basically introduced me to New York subways. And basically, they're spectacular, and anywhere I would go after that, I basically would always look for a hotel on a subway line because it just makes life so much easier. And that's now a priority for me when I do my traveling trips, and it all came from Krissa. Going to New York 2 times within 2 years for the very first time with 2 different people gave 2 different experiences. Jason and me saw a bulk of different things, but we just went and saw them. We didn't need to necessarily go in and view everything. We just basically like, oh, there's the Statue of Liberty. Nice, I've seen it, but we didn't have to go to it. And there's also different things I never would have thought of going to. And Krissa opened my eyes to some really nice things. Every time I go to New York now, I need to go to the M&M store. That, again, is a Krissa influence. We went to see some art, some museums, stuff that I wouldn't have gone to without having someone that was interested in those things. And I'm very glad that I got to go see those things because they're not something that I would have put high on my list, but I got to see something that was really cool and really special. And having people with different interests in your life in general is spectacular instead of just having people around you that are 100% clone copies of you. It's really nice to see on a trip some of these things that you may have overlooked or didn't even know were there. Versus the first trip where I just kind of drove around Central Park, and I think we could drive into Central Park a little more than we can now. We walked Central Park and saw different sites there. And we also went to see some pretty cool things. Like, I never would have thought of Toys R Us, which is not there anymore, as a cool place to go see, but it was a cool place to go see because they had massive Lego figures. They had all kinds of neat things. We also went to the store that had the walking piano that was from the movie Big, which every kid from my age loved the movie Big. And that was just cool to see the piano that you could walk on. And that was spectacular. And those are things I might have missed if it wasn't for a different perspective. And of course, still had to go to my baseball game, which was great. I enjoyed getting there. Again, I will admit I like the old Yankee Stadium a little better than the new Yankee Stadium. I had to go sit the first year in the bleacher creature section, which was supposed to be the violent part of the stadium, and it was fun. The next year, I had to go sit there again, and it was mild and kind of boring, to be honest with you. And just the history made old Yankee Stadium special. The new Yankee Stadium, yeah, it was new, but the old one was special. And I still enjoy getting to go to see it, and I'll definitely be back. And I should clarify, when I say I had to sit in a certain section, it's I had a desire to go sit in those sections because I wanted to see what it was like. You hear the stories about the fielders out in right field getting yelled and screamed at and all kinds of experiences. And I wanted to see what that was like. I will say I didn't really get a lot of people heckling me. And again, back in those days, Blue Jays fans just didn't travel the way they do now to baseball games. And I remember walking up to the stadium and I heard this little boy saying to his mom, "How come he's allowed to wear his Blue Jays stuff?" And his mom replying, "Because he's big." And I did get a chuckle out of that. That being said, I remember on the way also walking to one of the games. I don't remember if it was the first year or the second year. I was making it to the second and third game, and maybe the fourth game. I can't remember of the series. I didn't go to the whole series, so I missed the night game before I got there. And this guy started yelling and screaming at me, and he was just ripping into me. I think he was trying to show off to his girlfriend. And I just looked at him like 9-1. And that's because the Jays had beat the Yankees the night before 9-1. So every time I was getting heckled, I was just like 9-1. And the fans really didn't have a lot to say, but I enjoyed getting to have that retaliation, so to speak. That being said, I do have a better heckling story for a couple of years later, but I'll save that for my next trip. And that concludes my 2009 trip to New York with Krissa. But it wouldn't be my last trip to New York with Krissa, as in 2016, Krissa and Sid, two of my friends, would come back to New York City and I would see it again. I can't really remember why in 2016 I wanted to go back to New York. I think I felt like it was just time. At this point, New York had set off a little bit of an adventure for me of seeing different cities. There was a little while where I think I didn't really want to go down to the States, just I didn't have a lot of desire. But my original trip in 2008 to see the Blue Jays and the Yankees really kind of inspired me to see more. So I went on several trips over the next couple of years, including overseas as well as to other baseball stadiums. Absolutely loved Boston. That stadium, just again, it felt so rich in history. The same thing I liked about the original Yankee Stadium. I started seeing other baseball stadiums. I believe in that time frame is when I went to Detroit, and I saw a whole bunch of stadiums whenever I could. And it started to become a thing. And at this point, I just kind of felt like going back to New York. I don't know why. There's something about New York that was just kind of calling me back. And it's not unlike my most recent trip, which I was on while I was filming this scene in the background right now, where it just felt like it was time. And even when I was about to leave New York, I knew I was going to be back. So one of the things when I travel, I like to make it clear to some of my friends, if there's something that they want to do and I'm not as interested in it, go ahead, enjoy, have fun. Especially when there's multiple friends and they can go off and do an adventure together, go off and enjoy. So in this trip, it was a little bit different because I'm not into drinking and going to the bars and stuff like that, but my friends were more interested in doing some of that in the evenings. And I'd go for walks and then wander, and I went and saw the best comedy show of my life. And I just find it quite enjoyable. Plus, things just happen when I wander alone. I have no issue with walking into areas that other people kind of look at and be like, yeah, you shouldn't go down there. I kind of go down and I'm like, hey, I'm going to probably get a story out of this. I didn't get a lot of stories walking through New York, but I do remember at the end of the trip, I went and I asked one of my friends, and she's a police officer, and I'm like, hey, out of curiosity, how many times a day were you asked to buy drugs? And she's like, what are you talking about? Nobody ever asked me to buy drugs. And she's like, and what do you mean, how many times a day? And I was kind of like, yeah, at least 4 or 5 times a day people ask me if I wanted drugs. And she's like, what? I'm like, yeah, I guess I just have that look. On one of the nights when I was doing my wandering, I had noticed there was a comedy show, comedy club that was off Broadway. And it was kind of a joke because it was kind of like barely on Broadway, and it was basically a door that was on the Broadway side, and you walk down this door. It was basically like an alley almost, to like almost a building that was off of Broadway, but the door was on Broadway, so I think that was part of the joke. And you walked back there, and it was cheap. I want to say it was like $25, but you had to buy 2 drinks while you were there. Not a big deal. And the comedians were on fire. Honestly, it was just so good, so enjoyable, and I had such an amazing time. And as I mentioned earlier, I think in one of my videos, I'm all good with being a part of the show. If the comedian wants to include me, great. If they don't want to include me, don't care. So this guy started attacking me. And he started making fun of me because I was still kind of wearing my Blue Jays stuff. I had a Blue Jays hat on, and one of the baseball players at the time was called, or named, I should say, Kevin Pillar. He had a nickname, Superman. So I had a Superman shirt on, and the guy just started ripping into me about you shouldn't wear a Superman shirt unless you're built like Superman. And if you're not in good shape and strong, you should not be wearing it, and I should be embarrassed. Again, he was on fire at this point, and everyone was loving everything he did. The room turned cold. There was 3 or 4 ladies started yelling and screaming at him, and everyone came to my defense. And it was actually something that was really cool. Again, I didn't really care, but the support I was getting from the room was incredible. And I noticed all of a sudden he kind of started to clue in, and he's like, I have a question. He's like, are you from Canada? And how many people in this room are from Canada? And literally the entire room raised their hand up. And the difference between this trip and previous trips I've had to New York is Blue Jays fans were really starting to travel to games now. And since the Jays were in town, everyone there was from Canada. He actually went around the whole room. There was only 2 people that weren't from Canada in the entire room. And immediately he's like, okay, got it. No making fun of the Canadians and no making fun of Canada. I got the message. It was actually pretty funny. And he did a great job rebounding and honestly got everyone back on his side immediately. And I think the other 2 people were from Texas. So we started making fun of Texas or something. And he got back on track, and it was great. Being the big Blue Jays fan I am, I wanted to go to all 3 of the Blue Jays games, which my friends were kind of looking at me like, you're going to go to all 3? So they came with me to the first game, and then I went on my own to the next 2. And I will say, again, I love wandering off on my own and experiencing some of the stuff because things just happen. So, again, one of the memorable experiences I had was on my way to the second game. So I just got off the subway, and I'm walking through the Bronx. I'm heading to Yankee Stadium. And again, I'm 6 foot. This man comes up to me, and he's way bigger than me. And honestly, he's got huge muscles. He's probably 6'4", 6'5", and he comes up and just starts chest bumping me and kind of threatened to literally beat the shit out of me in his words. And he is going to town. And he's like, what are you going to do about it? And I just start laughing at him. And he's like, why are you laughing? And I'm like, because you're not going to do a thing. You're just having fun, and you're not going to do anything. And I'm going to continue on my way and walk over to the game. And he literally breaks out in a huge smile, and he starts laughing. And he's like, absolutely, I'm just playing with you. I just wanted to get a reaction, and that was hilarious. And a little bit of ribbing is to be expected. Again, I do wear full-on Blue Jays gear wherever I'm going when I'm going to a Blue Jays game. So I'm asking for a little bit of people having a fun at my expense. I don't remember which game it was that I went to on this trip, but it was one of them. There was this man in front of me, and he was there with his kids, and he was all very prim and proper and just looked like an upstanding citizen. And this is definitely the game where I wanted to be in the bleachers because at least one of the games, every single time I went to the bleachers. Not at every game, but one of the games. And the Blue Jays put in a pitcher that I knew was going to choke up the game because the Jays were winning. And I literally said to the people around me, I'm like, you've won. And they're like, you're winning by 3 runs. I'm like, yeah, no, this pitcher that's coming in right now, you've just won the game. And they're looking at me like I'm crazy. Sure enough, a couple of minutes later, Yankees come storming back, take the lead in a dramatic fashion. And this prim and proper man gets up and just starts feeding it to me. And he is saying every unimaginably bad word possible in the phrases to let me know that my team sucks and they just blanked our butts. And I just looked at him and I looked down to the kids and I'm like, wow, you're a great role model. And his face went so red, it wasn't even funny. And then he's just like, I'm sorry. I learned this when I went to Boston prior to this trip. I'm more willing to talk to strangers, and they're more willing to talk to me when I'm there by myself. When I'm with friends, I just talk with my friends, and I don't engage with the people around me as much. When I wander off and do these little adventures on my own, I'm far more engaging with other people around me, and I'm far more engaging with everything to do with the moment, which is pretty exciting and fun, especially when stories come out of it. And even the next game that I went to, I ended up with some stories, and it ended up being fun because I started engaging with everyone around me. Now, I have been kind of yelled at some baseball games for talking to too many people around me, and there would be someone a seat or two or a row away getting mad at me for talking with the other people that are in the audience. But the next game was pretty sweet because I actually had 2 full rows in a group conversation, and it was hilarious. And everyone's interactions with each other was so much fun. And it's one of those moments, again, I'm in Yankee Stadium, and they started talking about some different jokes and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, have you ever heard about the Yankees and the Blue Jays joke? And they're like, no. I'm like, seriously, you've never heard it? And they're like, absolutely not. I'm like, oh, well, why are the Blue Jays better than the Yanks? And they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, well, that's because it takes 9 Yanks to do the job of one BJ. And the reaction was hilarious. They were all killing themselves. And I couldn't believe I actually got away with telling that joke in Yankee Stadium. But they were loving it. And it was one of those moments where you just kind of remember the group and all the people around you and just how engaged everyone was in those couple of rows. It was just something you'll never forget about. So not only do I not really partake in the bars and all of that kind of scene, I'm an early riser. So I'd get up before my friends, and one of the things I also took from my friends is staying in Times Square in New York is the best thing to do. And I'm so glad we did it. I'm pretty cheap sometimes, and I would have never done it. But my friend said she basically suggested we do it because police officers get a discount there, and it's just the place to stay. It was great because then we could do our own little things. And in the morning, I'd get up earlier, and it's so close to Central Park. Every single day, I go walk Central Park, and I walked all of it from one end to the other end. I just saw all the nooks and crannies, and then by lunchtime, I'd come back and hook up with them, and then we go have lunch and kind of do whatever that day took us to. And I had such a great time exploring Central Park and seeing the sights and the sounds. I will say on this trip, as I'm doing this, and part of the reason I'm on the bus right now taking some footage and you're getting to see that, is because I'm 8 years older than the last time I did this. And oh man, I am just sore all over. And I'm glad I was able to do it when I could. I could probably still do it again. I just have to pace myself a little bit more than I did last time. This time, I definitely felt it, but it is so worth it because there's just so much beauty in Central Park. And now I've gotten to see it in the summer, I've got to see it in the fall, and there's so many things that you can take from it each and every time you see it. And I still want to see it in the wintertime covered in snow. Christmas just is such a bucket list thing to see in New York. I've never really thought about Central Park at Christmas, but I'm sure it's just as beautiful as the rest of the city, if not more beautiful. I know it seems kind of weird to kind of remember something that's non meaningful, but Krissa also introduced me to Uber. I had never been in an Uber before. And I remember we took the Uber over to where you take the ferries, then you can go over to Staten Island and you can go over to the different boroughs, see the Statue of Liberty. And it was a neat experience doing that for the very first time. It's not that something that is special, but it's just when it's the first time you've ever done something like that, it's memorable. And of course, just like the last time we went on a trip like this, we went to some more different museums and saw some more art, which was really nice because, again, it's not something I would typically do in my everyday life. So I did appreciate getting to see that. And we can't go to New York without going to the M&M store, of course. So we went back to the M&M store, and now I've been there 3 times out of my 4 trips. I've gone to the M&M store, and I'll probably go again just because it's kind of just a sentimental thing at this point just to do. And I don't know if anyone else is like this. One of the things I love when I travel is seeing places and then either putting it towards a movie or a TV show you saw, or kind of when you see it in a movie, recollecting your time there and be like, oh, I saw that. And I remember the first time I ever saw John Wick, and they had the scene that was kind of entering Central Park. That made me feel that kind of same nostalgia from when I was there. And I'm like, oh, I saw that part, and I really enjoyed that part of the park. And they obviously shoot some of these scenes in places like this because it means something and it is beautiful. But it's just incredible sometimes when you've actually been somewhere and then you're watching a movie that you love and you're like, that's, I've been there. That's a spot I've been. And that concludes my third trip to New York City. And again, I got different experiences because, again, me and Krissa had already been to New York, and I went to New York with a different friend. But now having Krissa and Sid with me, we also had different experiences because there was different interest and getting to see different sides of New York. First time with Krissa, I really started to become a fan of using subway systems on some of my trips, and I still do that to this day. This time, having Sid with us and staying in Times Square, especially with people on slightly different schedules, them being a little bit more night owls, me being a little bit more of liking to get up in the morning and walk Central Park. It was fantastic. And I wouldn't trade those memories or those experiences because they were just so valuable, and that's some of the best parts of life is the memories and the people you share it with. That being said, I do love my solo trips. Which leads me into my latest trip, which I've just wrapped up. But I do value each trip for different reasons. And this trip was also fantastic because I do like just going at my own schedule, going at my own pace, and doing whatever. I didn't actually plan this trip with a lot of notice. A week and a half prior to this trip, I just randomly looked up one of my favorite musicians, Duff McKagan, and noticed that he was playing in Boston and New York. And I do want to go back to Boston as well, but I started pricing it, and Boston was just going to be more expensive. And I like New York a lot. So to pay less money and go to New York, it just seemed like a no brainer. Once I had figured out what I was going to do and where I was going to go, I do like to leave things fairly loose as far as my schedule. Now, keep in mind, I do plan out my trips, but I keep it very loose. So I flew into New York without an exact way to get to the hotel that I needed to get to. But anyone with a little bit of common sense realizes there's buses, there's Uber, there's taxis, there's all kinds of ways. I wasn't worried about that. So I just basically flew in, and then first option, because it's the cheapest, I went and looked for the buses, found the buses, and then, found out what exit I should get off on, and I jumped on the exit. But while I was going there, I realized that if I got off earlier, I'd be closer to Central Park. And again, I had a lot of time to wait until I got to the hotel because I couldn't check in until 4 o'clock. So I got off early, got off in Harlem, walked over to Central Park. I will say, I feel like there's a lot made of Harlem, and I'm sure it used to be worse back in the day, and I'm sure it's a lot better than it is now. But it still has a bit of a stigma. And even when I was at the comedy show, the guy was joking around that he's from Harlem, and it's not a good place to be. And you kind of wonder how much is just being talked up about that and how much of it is real. But I will say, I did find some humor in this little old white lady walking down in Harlem with a Black Lives Matters shirt on. And I was chuckling because I was thinking to myself, if you are scared of Harlem, that's probably a good way for a little old white lady to approach it as she's walking down Harlem. To me, everyone was very nice. But again, 6 feet tall, people don't usually go out of their way to start stuff. So sometimes my perception on things isn't the same as someone that's 5 foot nothing. And as I came out of Harlem and I got to the park, honestly, I was just like, this is perfect. I sat down by one of the little lakes they have in there, and it's just so beautiful. And it was perfect weather. It was 21, 22. It was like t-shirts and shorts weather. I actually couldn't believe how warm it was, and kind of wish I had brought some shorts. But again, I hadn't even checked into my hotel yet, so I wouldn't have had anywhere to put all the extra clothes and stuff like that. So it was great. And honestly, I enjoyed walking through the trees and the forest areas that had still had lots of color on it, and just honestly made my way eventually to Times Square. And at that point, decided that I was going to hit a Olive Garden. Not my first choice, and I was also thinking I don't want to hit a chain restaurant in New York, but I couldn't get into the hotel yet. So I also thought they have clean washrooms, so it's a good place to go have lunch. And I was actually shocked that I think I spent $29 at the Olive Garden, and most of the time I was eating street meat, and it was still coming to close to $20 for the street meat. So for $9 more, I could go to the Olive Garden. But you don't go to New York for the Olive Garden. You go to New York for the flavor, the stuff that makes it special. Pizza, street meat, all that good stuff. And again, it was pretty much last minute, week and a half. I didn't really tell a lot of people what my plans were. So I was having a little bit of fun on some social media, sending out some pictures as I was going, kind of saying, guess where I am. I did this one other time when I did a trip to Pittsburgh to see the Pirates. And all I did was take a picture of the little game that you get in Cracker Barrel and nothing else. There was nothing to show what city or whatever I was in, just the game. And I posted it saying, guess where I am. And someone literally replied, Pittsburgh Cracker Barrel. And they know that I like traveling to baseball games, so that's why they knew the city. But it was just so fast. I expected them to guess Crackle Barrel, but I did not expect them to guess Pittsburgh immediately. So I thought I would have some fun and do that again. So I started posting some pictures, and it was about the 12th person that guessed exactly where I was. And I was enjoying that as I was traveling. But I also sent a text to a friend with a picture. And right as I was sending the picture, I was startled because I'm in Times Square, And this guy, which is kind of famous, but I was still startled, basically jumped out at me with his guitar with Trump all over it and basically naked, just wearing his underwear. And when you're not really paying attention to your surroundings and some guy in his underwear just kind of jumps out at you and starts grabbing your shoulder and grabbing your attention and stuff like that, I will say it did take me a second and I was thrown. And if there's anyone listening to that, they might be guessing that is the naked cowboy. I wasn't paying attention, and I know a lot of people know of him, and he is well known for being there, just like Tickle Me Elmo and the ladies in the Mickey Mouse suits and Spider Man and all of that. But I was not expecting a naked man. As the reason I was in New York was to see Duff McKagan, which is the bassist for Guns N' Roses, I was wearing a Guns N' Roses t-shirt. And that's what got his attention, and that's why he came over and started talking to me, is because he appreciates Guns N' Roses as well. And it was actually a nice interaction, but I was just startled at first. So one of the other interactions that kind of jumped out at me and kind of surprised me was just a real quick one, but it caught me off guard. Later on that night, I went to the subway because I was going to take the subway down to the show. And as a Canadian, we don't use the swipe part of our visas very often. And when you don't use that on your credit cards, they don't typically work. So when I went to the subway, it wanted me to insert it because it wasn't using the chip, which we're used to, or tapping. And it didn't have that technology on the machine. So I was having issues getting my pass. So I decided that I was going to go back up, find a bank machine because it would accept cash, and then I would come back and try it again. Later on, I found out that you can just get on the actual subway and tap with your credit card because there's a machine now on the entrances where you can tap, but I didn't know this at the time. Anyhow, as I was coming out, this um, beer beer can came flying through the lady's skirt in front of me, and I had no idea what was going on, and then just exploded at the bottom of the stairs. And I literally had no idea what was happening. But as I got to the top of the steps, I realized it was a homeless man that had just launched this thing down the thing, and it literally went through the lady's skirt and basically nicked my hand as it went screaming past. And it was just definitely one of those New York experiences. But besides the lady and me, nobody even pays attention, just carries on, which is so New York. So after I had gone through all of that and got some money for the machine, I actually decided not to even use the subway. I decided to walk because I was honestly pretty excited about the concert I was going to see. I'm not really going to talk about that on this video because I have a whole other video about that day and more breakdown and talk a lot about the concert and what it means to me and that. So if you're interested, please head over to that video when you're done watching this one. I've never actually done a bus tour up until this trip in New York. I have done bus tours in other cities. I found them fantastic and I really enjoyed it. I definitely did one in Philadelphia. I think I did it I definitely did it in Las Vegas and some other cities that I've been to. I never had the desire to do it in New York, but I just felt this time just to do something different, it would be good. And I've kind of come to an appreciation over that time since my original trips about bus tours. Because you learn a little bit of history, you learn a little bit of stuff that you just wouldn't know unless it's basically force fed to you. And that part of the information I do enjoy, as well as just being able to sit back and relax. Because New York, the traffic can be quite busy. And after the first day of just go, 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 I knew the second day I was going to take the bus tour. I did have some, big plans of doing the night tour, and with my package, it also gave me this special one in the morning to go over and see this other area. And I didn't do that. I got it in the package. It just got so cold by the second night on the evening, and the traffic was so bad. It just took us forever to get back. And by that time, I was just hungry and wanted to eat, and I had the comedy show coming up at 9 o'clock, and I really wanted to be on the last tour by, it was either 5 or 6 o'clock, I can't remember, so that I could be back in time. But after struggling to get back in time for that one and it getting colder, and knowing that I would want to go get a heavier, sweatshirt and stuff like that for the tour, that I was best of just cutting that out. So I didn't get my second night tour that I was looking forward to, because I did think it was going to be very nice to do that at nighttime. Instead, what I did after I went and had some supper and I went and watched the comedy show, I went for a walk into some of the areas like Brant Park, and it was quite enjoyable to go see those areas at nighttime. And I just tried to walk down different streets that I hadn't walked down yet, and it was very enjoyable. So, one of the things that I was going to tell a story about was, I mentioned about the comedy show, and just like the year I had come before, I ended up being part of the show. Being a large white guy, of course, I got pegged as the Trump supporter, which anyone knows me is as far away from the truth as possible. But whatever makes the show funnier, I am all for. So a couple of the comedians definitely had fun at my expense, using me in that term, and I was totally good with it. There was quite a few back and forth interactions with the crowd on some of the people that were there, but definitely they seem to like me a lot, which, again, I don't try to heckle or do any of that stuff because I just appreciate what they're doing. I did make a smart aleck comment to one point because he asked everyone what they were afraid of, and honestly, there's not a lot that really truly gives me fear. So I didn't really have a good answer, and I just said comedians, and he just looked at me and was just kind of like, get out of here. And it was funny though, because there was these guys, and they were from an area on the other coast, which is known for gangs, and they were playing into it, and they were joking around with a comedian about the fact that they were kind of these gang guys. And when they were talking about fears, all their fears were like the softest little things possible. And the comedian eventually called them out on it. He's like, wait a second. You guys are big, tough gang guys, and you're afraid of clowns. And I can't remember some of the other things, but they were all just the softest things. And it was absolutely hilarious. That comedian in particular was probably my favorite. But there was two that just absolutely killed. And there was another two that were very, very good. I'm pretty sure I had seen clips of all of them online in the past. So that doesn't hurt to kind of have a little bit of a reference point to begin with. The one comedian made a great joke about the fact that he had reached his lifelong goal of performing for 38 people in a comedy club in New York after 10 years of work. I do appreciate people that can joke and laugh at themselves, and I try to joke and laugh at my own expense as well. Earlier in the day, I'd also seen a bunch of things that make me want to go back to New York. Like they had the big aircraft carrier sitting in the bay, I guess it is, and it looked pretty neat because they had some really cool aircraft sitting on the deck. And that made me want to go see that. And there was a couple other things I wanted to go see. Earlier in the day, I'd also got out and walked Little Italy and Chinatown and just got to see and have some fun in those areas. And it just adds to the experience when you get in and out. And just even all the people coming up to you, trying to get you to buy their stuff on the side of the street, or just the interactions and watching the people with the different interactions. It's just so much fun. And I realized as there's so many things like that aircraft carrier that I'd like to see, and there were some other things I can't think of at the moment that I really want to go back and see, that I'll probably make trips every so often to New York for the rest of my life, just because there's so much there to see. And there's no point in trying to push it all into a day or two and not enjoy the moments just because you're trying to rush from one thing to another, when you can kind of sit back and be like, you know what, I'll be back. Let me just enjoy this moment. And I think on that statement, I'm going to end this video. It's only halfway through the bus tour. The bus tour is great, but I'll be back and I'm going to enjoy it. And I'll have more stories to add to this. So, in short, if you want to watch more about this trip, I have a video that details it a little bit more for this specific trip. But I'll be back and just enjoy the moment.